I was standing in my sister's hospital room at 3:40 - 7 in the morning when I realized she was going to die and I was finally going to win. She looked so small in that bed, tubes running from her arms, machines beeping steadily in the dark. All I could think about was the document in my briefcase downstairs in my car, the one she'd signed 6 months ago, when she still thought I was the forgiveness type, when she still believed I'd spent 7 years rebuilding our relationship instead of systematically destroying everything she'd stolen from me. The nurse had just told me she had maybe 40 - 8 hours left and I should call the family. But there was no family to call anymore. Just me unhearing the truth she was about to take to her grave about what she'd done to our mother. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to die knowing I'd figured it out, or if I wanted her final moments filled with the same ignorant peace she'd had while spending the $3.2 million that should have been mine. Before I tell you how I turned my mother's deathbed into a 7-year revenge plan that destroyed my sister's entire legacy, tell me where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who we were before everything broke to really appreciate how perfectly I rebuilt it all just to watch it shatter. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 40 - 2 years old now, and I'm an estate planning attorney, which is ironic in ways I'll explain later. My sister Victoria is 3 years older than me. For most of our lives we weren't close, but we weren't enemies either. We were just sisters who'd taken different paths and didn't have much to say to each other at family gatherings. She went into finance, married a corporate lawyer named David, had 2 kids, lived in a house that cost more than most people make in a lifetime. I stayed single, focused on my career, bought a modest condo, and visited our mother every Sunday for 15 years. Our mother's name was Eleanor Chen. She was the kind of woman who believed family was everything, even when family gave her nothing in return. She raised us alone after our father died when I was 7 and Victoria was 10, worked 2 jobs to put us through private school. Never complained, never asked for anything. Just gave and gave until there was nothing left of her except the person who existed to serve everyone else. When I was 20 - 7 and Victoria was 30, our mother started showing signs of early onset dementia. Not the aggressive kind where you forget your children's names and wander into traffic. The slow erosion type. You'd be having a perfectly normal conversation and suddenly she'd repeat something she'd said 5 minutes ago. Or forget she'd already taken her medication and take it again. Or call me by Victoria's name even though we looked nothing alike. Victoria lived 40 minutes away. I lived 12 minutes away. Guess which one of us restructured her entire life to become a caregiver? For 15 years, I was the one who took Mom to doctor's appointments, managed her medications, made sure she ate properly, paid her bills, handled her finances, sat with her during the bad days when she didn't recognize her own living room. Victoria visited maybe once every 2 months, always with an excuse about work being crazy or the kids having activities or David needing her for some important dinner. She'd stay for 30 minutes, kiss Mom on the cheek, promise to come back soon, and disappear for another 8 weeks. I never complained about it because that's not who I am. I didn't keep score. I just did what needed to be done because Mom had spent her entire life doing what needed to be done for us. But apparently Victoria was keeping score, just in a different way. When Mom turned 70 - 3 about 18 months before she died, her doctors told us the dementia was progressing faster than expected. She was going to need full time care within a year, possibly memory care facility placement. We needed to start planning for end of life decisions. I'd been putting off the conversation about Mom's will because it felt ghoulish, like we were waiting for her to die so we could divide up her things. But her lawyer, a family friend named Patricia Morrison who'd known us since childhood, said we couldn't wait any longer. Mom's assets weren't enormous, but they weren't nothing either. She owned her house outright, worth about $800,000 in our market. She had retirement accounts totaling around $400,000. Life insurance policy for $300,000. Some stocks and bonds, maybe another $200,000. Total estate value approximately $1.7 million. Give or take. Patricia scheduled a meeting at her office on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I took the day off work. Victoria showed up 20 minutes late wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than Mom's monthly expenses. Mom was having a good day, lucid and present. Patricia walked her through the will very carefully. Standard stuff. Nothing complicated. The house and all assets would be divided equally between Victoria and me. Patricia would be executor. Very straightforward. Very fair. Victoria listened with her lawyer face on, nodding at the right moments, asking clarifying questions that made her sound concerned and responsible. When Patricia finished, Victoria leaned forward and said something that should have been my first warning. Mom, I think we should also talk about healthcare power of attorney. If something happens and you can't make medical decisions, we need to know who's authorized to speak for you. Patricia nodded approvingly. That's very prudent. Victoria. Eleanor, have you thought about who you'd want making those decisions? Mom looked at me. Sarah's been handling everything medical for years. I trust her completely. Victoria's smile didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Of course, that makes sense. Sarah's been wonderful. I just want to make sure we have backup designations too, in case Sarah's not available in an emergency. I could be secondary. Mom agreed. Patricia made notes. The meeting ended with everyone signing documents. Victoria hugged me in the parking lot and told me she was sorry she hadn't been more helpful with Mom's care, that she was going to try to be more present going forward. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Over the next 6 months, Victoria actually did start visiting more often. Once a week, sometimes twice. She'd bring takeout food, sit with Mom, ask me how things were going, offer to help with scheduling or bills or anything I needed. She started texting me regularly to check in. She even came to a few doctor's appointments with us. I was relieved. I thought maybe the reality of Mom's declining health had finally made Victoria realize how little time we had left, how important it was to be present. I thought she was stepping up the way I always hoped she would. I was so stupidly grateful for the help that I didn't notice the pattern. Every time Victoria visited, she'd spend time alone with Mom, said she wanted some private mother-daughter time, wanted to reminisce about old memories, didn't want me to feel like she was intruding on the relationship I'd built with Mom over the years. It seemed thoughtful. It seemed kind. What she was actually doing was slowly, carefully, methodically convincing our mother that I was stealing from her. I didn't know any of this at the time. I found out later, much later, from Mom's healthcare aide Rosa, who'd been with us 3 times a week for the final year. Rosa told me that Victoria would wait until I left the room and then she'd say things to Mom like, "Have you noticed your bank account seems lower than it should be? Or Sarah's been handling all your finances, right? Do you ever check the statements? Or I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Mom. I just think it's important that you stay aware of where your money is going." Mom's dementia made her vulnerable to suggestion. If you told her something with enough confidence, she'd start to believe it might be true even if she had no memory of it happening. Victoria knew this. Victoria used this. By September, 8 months before Mom died, Victoria had convinced her that I'd been mismanaging her finances, possibly stealing from her accounts, definitely taking advantage of her declining mental state. I had no idea this was happening because Mom never said anything to me about it. She just started acting slightly different. A little more guarded when I'd mention bills or expenses. A little less willing to sign things without reading them multiple times. I thought it was the dementia progressing. I thought she was getting more confused, more paranoid, which is common with cognitive decline. In October, Victoria took Mom to lunch, just the 2 of them. When they came back, Victoria pulled me aside and said Mom had expressed some concerns about her financial situation. Nothing serious, just wanted to make sure everything was properly documented and transparent. Victoria suggested we hire a financial advisor to do a full review of Mom's accounts, just to give Mom peace of mind. It seemed reasonable. It seemed like Victoria was trying to help reduce Mom's anxiety. The financial advisor was someone Victoria knew from work. His name was Gerald Mitchell and he came to the house, reviewed all of Mom's statements with her present, and concluded that everything looked fine. All the money was accounted for. I felt vindicated. I thought this would settle Mom's concerns. But 2 weeks later, Victoria called me upset. She said Mom had called her crying, saying she didn't trust the advisor's report, that something felt wrong but she couldn't articulate what. Victoria said we should respect Mom's feelings even if they weren't rational, that maybe we should consider having Victoria take over some of the financial management to ease Mom's mind. I said no. Not because I didn't trust Victoria, but because Mom was comfortable with our existing routine and changing things would only confuse her more. Victoria seemed to accept this, said she understood, said she just wanted Mom to feel secure. 3 weeks later, Mom had a small stroke. Not devastating but significant. She spent 4 days in the hospital and came home weaker, more confused, sleeping 16 hours a day. Her doctor said this was likely the beginning of the end, that we should expect her to continue declining, that it might be time to consider hospice evaluation. Victoria was at the hospital every day during Mom's stay. She brought flowers, held Mom's hand, cried in the hallway, played the devoted daughter role perfectly. I was touched. I thought we were finally coming together as sisters in this terrible time. On the 2nd day in the hospital, when I'd gone home to shower and change clothes, Victoria visited Mom alone. According to the nurse's notes I obtained much later, Victoria spent 2 hours in that room with the door closed. When I came back that evening, Mom seemed agitated. Whether Patricia still had the originals, I reassured her that everything was fine, that all her affairs were in order, that she didn't need to worry about anything except getting better. She looked at me with this expression I still see when I close my eyes, this mixture of confusion and fear in something else I couldn't identify at the time but now recognize as doubt. She said, "Victoria says there's a problem with the will." "What kind of problem?" I asked. "She says you changed something. She says Patricia has a different version than the one I remember signing." I was so shocked I actually laughed. "Mom, that's not true. Victoria's confused. Nothing's been changed. You signed one will, it's filed with Patricia. Everything is exactly as you wanted it." Mom stared at me for a long moment. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Victoria says I should sign a new one, just to be safe." She brought papers. "What papers?" "I didn't sign them. I told her I needed to think about it." But she seemed very concerned, Sarah. "She thinks you're trying to cheat me." I wanted to scream. I wanted to find Victoria and shake her and demand to know what the hell she was doing. But Mom was fragile, recovering from a stroke, and I couldn't upset her. So I smiled and said we'd sort it all out when she was feeling better, that she shouldn't worry about anything right now. When Victoria came back the next morning, I pulled her into the hallway and confronted her as calmly as I could manage. "What did you say to Mom about her will?" Victoria's face was perfect innocence. "I just mentioned that she should make sure everything's updated properly." "Is there a problem?" "You told her I changed something. You told her there's a different version with Patricia." "I didn't say that." "Mom's confused, Sarah. She's having a hard time keeping things straight. I was just trying to help her feel more in control of her affairs. By telling her I'm trying to cheat her? I never said that. If that's what she understood, it's because the dementia is making her paranoid. I'm worried about her mental state. Maybe we should talk to her doctor about anti-anxiety medication." She was so smooth, So reasonable. So completely believable that for a moment I doubted myself. Wondered if I'd misunderstood what Mom had told me. I let it go. I didn't push it. And that was my mistake. Mom came home from the hospital on a Friday. Hospice evaluation was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Victoria visited Sunday afternoon while I was at the grocery store getting supplies. When I came back, Victoria was just leaving. She kissed my cheek and said she'd be back Wednesday to sit with Mom while I worked. On Monday morning, I got a call from Patricia Morrison's office. Patricia's assistant said Patricia needed to see me right away, that there was an urgent matter regarding my mother's estate that required immediate attention. I went to Patricia's office during my lunch break, thinking maybe there was some paperwork that needed updating or some technical issue with the will. Patricia looked uncomfortable when I arrived, which was unusual, because she was normally very composed and professional. She closed her office door and said, "Sarah, your mother came to see me on Saturday with Victoria. They had an appointment I wasn't aware had been scheduled. Your mother signed a new will." Everything stopped. The room tilted slightly. "What?" "Victoria called Friday evening and said your mother wanted to make some changes." "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I realize now I should have confirmed with you directly. What changes did she make?" Patricia opened a file on her desk. Her hands were shaking slightly. "The new will leaves everything to Victoria. The house, the accounts, the life insurance, everything. You're not mentioned at all except to explicitly state that you're being excluded from the estate." I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't draw air into my lungs for what felt like an entire minute. "That's not possible. Mom wouldn't do that. Victoria manipulated her. Mom has dementia, she's not competent to sign legal documents. I evaluated her competency as required by law. She was lucid during the meeting, answered all my questions appropriately, could articulate her reasons for the changes. I have no legal grounds to refuse to file the new will." "Sarah, what reasons?" Patricia looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. "She said you'd been mismanaging her finances, possibly stealing from her accounts. She said Victoria discovered discrepancies and tried to address them with you, but you became defensive and refused to provide documentation. She said she no longer trusted you to handle her affairs and wanted Victoria to inherit everything to ensure it was properly managed." I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. "That's a lie. All of it. I have every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of documentation for every penny I've spent on her care for 15 years. Victoria fabricated this entire story. Can you prove that?" "Yes. I have everything organized." Patricia's expression was sympathetic but firm. "That's good, Sarah, and I believe you, but it doesn't change the legal reality. Your mother signed a new will while mentally competent, with proper legal counsel present. The fact that she may have been misled or manipulated doesn't make the will invalid unless we can prove she lacked the capacity to understand what she was signing, which I can testify she did not. But this will stands unless you want to challenge it in court, which would be expensive and difficult and might not succeed even with your documentation." I left Patricia's office and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to process what had just happened. Victoria had spent 6 months poisoning our mother against me, building a narrative of financial abuse, manipulating a woman with dementia into disinheriting her primary caregiver in favor of the daughter who'd barely been present for 15 years. I called Victoria. She answered on the third ring, sounding cheerful. "Hey, I just talked to Patricia." Brief pause. "She told you about the will update. You told Mom I was stealing from her. You convinced a woman with dementia that I was robbing her blind so you could take everything. I didn't convince her of anything. Mom came to those conclusions on her own. I just helped her protect herself. By lying to her. By manipulating someone who's mentally vulnerable. By being honest about concerns I had. You controlled everything, Sarah. Her finances, her healthcare, her daily life. You isolated her from the rest of the family and made yourself indispensable. Don't act like you weren't benefiting from that arrangement. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I spent 15 years taking care of her because no one else would. You visited twice a month and acted like that made you Daughter of the Year. And you're going to be compensated for that through Mom's estate. Oh wait, no you're not, because Mom realized what you were really doing and cut you out. That must be frustrating. She hung up. I sat there in the parking lot outside Patricia's office and I made a decision that would define the next 7 years of my life. I wasn't going to fight this in court. I wasn't going to scream and cry and beg Patricia to somehow fix it. I wasn't going to confront Victoria again and give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I was going to let this play out exactly as Victoria had planned it. I was going to smile and nod and play the hurt but accepting sister who eventually forgives and moves forward. I was going to rebuild our relationship slowly and carefully and make her trust me completely. And then, when she was vulnerable and exposed and dependent on that trust, I was going to destroy her so thoroughly that she'd spend the rest of her life wishing she'd just split the inheritance and left me alone. But first, I needed to wait for our mother to die. Mom lasted for more months. Hospice came in November. I continued caring for her every day despite knowing I'd get nothing for it. Because that's not why I'd been doing it in the first place. Victoria visited regularly, maintained her devoted daughter act, never once acknowledged what she'd done. Mom died on a Tuesday morning in February, peacefully in her sleep with me holding her hand. I called Victoria and she came over crying, genuinely grieving or performing grief, so well I couldn't tell the difference. We planned the funeral together. We stood side by side at the service. We hugged mourners and accepted condolences, and played the role of sisters united in grief. 3 days after the funeral, Patricia read the will. Victoria inherited everything as expected. Patricia looked at me with such profound sympathy that I almost broke character and told her it was fine, that I'd expected this, that I had plans. But I didn't. I just nodded and left. Victoria called me that evening. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm not going to keep everything. Mom wanted me to have control of the estate. But that doesn't mean I won't share. Once everything's settled and the house is sold, I'll give you something. Not half, but something fair for all the years you spent with her." "That's very generous," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I mean it. We're sisters. Family is important. I agree completely." 2 months later, after the house sold for $870,000 and all the accounts were settled, Victoria sent me a check for $50,000 with a note that said, "For your years of service. With love, V." $50,000. Out of an estate worth $3.2 million after the house sale and final account values. Not even 2%. And she framed it as payment for services rendered. Like I'd been a hired caregiver instead of a daughter. I deposited the check. I sent Victoria a thank you text. And then I went to work. The first thing I did was go back to the hospital where Mom had Hurst Roken request copies of all visitor logs and nurses' notes from her stay. It took some paperwork and some patience, but I got them. They confirmed Victoria had been alone with Mom for extended periods, including one to minus our window on the day Mom started asking about the will. Then I contacted Rosa, Mom's healthcare aide. I took her to lunch and asked very carefully if she'd noticed anything unusual about Victoria's visits in the months before Mom died. Rosa was hesitant at first, loyal to patient confidentiality even after Mom's death. But when I explained what Victoria had done with the will, Rosa's expression changed. "I knew something was wrong," Rosa said. "I told my supervisor, but she said it wasn't our business. Your sister would say things to your mother. Quiet things when she thought I wasn't listening. About money missing. About you spending too much on yourself. About how you were taking advantage. Your mother would get so upset after those visits. I tried to tell you once, but you seemed so stressed I didn't want to add to it. Did you document any of this? In my personal notes. Not in the official records because my supervisor said it was family drama and we shouldn't get involved. But I have them at home. Dates, times, things I heard Victoria say. Would you be willing to share those notes with me? Rosa looked at me for a long moment. Are you going to do something about what she did? Eventually. But I need evidence first. She gave me the notes. 3 months of documented conversations, dated and detailed, showing a clear pattern of Victoria deliberately manipulating a dementia patient. It wasn't enough to overturn the will. Statute of limitations had passed and I'd already accepted the $50,000, which could be argued as settlement. But it was enough to prove what Victoria had done. I made copies and put the originals in a safe deposit box. Then I did something that surprised even me. I called Victoria and asked if she wanted to have lunch. Said I'd been doing some thinking and I realized I'd been holding on to anger that wasn't healthy. That Mom wouldn't want us to be estranged. That family was too important to throw away over money. Victoria was shocked but pleased. We met at an expensive restaurant, her choice, and she spent 2 hours telling me about her life, her kids, her husband's career, her plans for the money she'd inherited. She mentioned she was thinking about buying a vacation home in Colorado. Said maybe I could visit sometimes. That it would be nice to have a place where the family could gather. I smiled and nodded and acted grateful to be included. That was 3 years ago. For 3 years I've been rebuilding our relationship. Slowly and carefully, becoming the sister Victoria always wanted me to be. Supportive, interested in her life, willing to babysit her kids, attending family gatherings, sending birthday gifts. I've watched her spend Mom's money on luxury vacations and home renovations and a new car. I've listened to her talk about her investment portfolio and her plans to retire early and maybe start a nonprofit in Mom's name. Something about elder care advocacy. The irony was so thick I almost choked. And while I was playing the forgiveness game, I was also doing something else. I was going back to school. Not full minus time, just night classes and online courses, adding a specialization to my law degree. Estate planning was already my field, but I went deeper. Forensic accounting, financial elder abuse investigation, medical documentation and capacity assessment. I became an expert in exactly the kind of fraud Victoria had committed. I also started volunteering with an elder rights advocacy organization. Made connections with forensic accountants, investigators, attorneys who specialized in estate litigation. Built a network of people who'd be useful when the time came. And I waited. Because revenge isn't about acting quickly. Revenge is about patience, timing, and making sure when you finally strike, it's devastating and complete. Last year, for years after Mom died, Victoria called me excited. She said she'd been asked to join the board of directors for a major nonprofit organization focused on Alzheimer's and dementia care. They wanted her because of her personal experience caring for Mom, her financial expertise, and her passion for elder advocacy. She actually said that. My personal experience caring for Mom. I congratulated her enthusiastically. Told her how proud Mom would be. Told her this was such important work. She was appointed to the board 6 months ago. She's been very public about her role. Doing interviews about the importance of family caregiving, writing blog posts about her journey with our mother's dementia, positioning herself as a voice for families dealing with cognitive decline. She has no idea that the nonprofit's board has very strict vetting processes and ethics requirements. She has no idea that board members are required to disclose any conflicts of interest or past legal issues or anything that might reflect poorly on the organization. She has no idea that I've been documenting everything she said publicly about Mom's care. Every interview where she positions herself as the primary caregiver. Every blog post where she talks about the sacrifices she made. And she has absolutely no idea that 2 months ago, I submitted a detailed complaint to the nonprofit's ethics committee about a board member who committed financial elder abuse against her own mother and is now using that mother's memory to build a public platform. The complaint included Rosa's notes, hospital visitor logs, financial records showing Victoria received $3.2 million from Mom's estate, while the actual caregiver received $50,000. Documentation of the will change. Patricia Morrison's statement about the suspicious circumstances of the new will signing. The ethics committee opened an investigation 3 weeks ago. Victoria doesn't know yet because they're being discreet, doing their due diligence before confronting her. But she's going to find out soon. And when she does, when she realizes that her position on the board is about to explode, when she understands that her entire public persona as a caregiving advocate is about to be exposed as a fraud built on elder abuse, when she starts desperately trying to figure out who reported her and why, I'm going to be right there. Her supportive sister, her family, the person she trusted enough to let her guard down around after 3 years of careful rebuilding. And that's when the real revenge begins. But there was something else I'd discovered. Something that changed everything and made what Victoria did so much worse than I'd originally thought. Something about our mother's death that might not have been natural at all. 6 months ago, I was organizing old files in my office when I found a folder I'd forgotten about. Paperwork from Mom's final weeks that I'd shoved in a drawer and never looked at again because it was too painful. Hospice intake forms, medication schedules, daily care logs, the mundane documentation of someone dying slowly. I almost threw it all away. I was standing over the recycling bin with the folder open when something caught my eye in the medication log. A notation from Rosa, dated 5 days before Mom died. That said, patient appears overly sedated, difficulty rousing for meals, notified hospice nurse per family request. Per family request. I'd never asked Rosa to notify anyone about Mom's sedation levels. Mom was on morphine for comfort care. Some sedation was expected and normal. Why would I have requested notification about something routine? Unless someone else had made that request. I pulled out my phone and called Rosa. She'd moved to Florida to be closer to her daughter, but we'd stayed in touch. Occasional texts around holidays. The kind of gentle connection you maintain with people who've seen you at your worst. She answered on the second ring and sounded happy to hear from me. After small talk, I said, "Rosa, I'm looking at the care logs from Mom's final week and there's a note about you notifying the hospice nurse about sedation levels. Do you remember that?" "Oh yes. Your sister asked me to watch for that. She was worried your mother was in pain and the morphine wasn't at the right level. She wanted to make sure the hospice team was keeping her comfortable." My heart started beating faster. "When did Victoria ask you to do that?" "Maybe a week before your mother passed. She came by one afternoon when you were at work and spent some time talking to me about your mother's comfort pair. She seemed very concerned about pain management. Did she ask about anything else?" Rosa was quiet for a moment, thinking. She asked a lot of questions about the medication schedule, what time doses were given, how we tracked them, who had access to the medication lockbox. I thought she was just being thorough, making sure everything was being handled properly. "Why, is something wrong?" "I don't know yet." "Did you notice anything unusual about Mom's condition in those final days?" "She declined very quickly at the end. Tuesday she was still talking a little, eating small amounts. By Thursday she was mostly unconscious. By Saturday morning she was gone. The hospice nurse said sometimes it happens that way. That patients hold on until they're ready to let go and then they go fast." "Do you remember if Victoria visited alone during that final week?" "A few times, yes. You were trying to work as much as possible before taking bereavement leave, so Victoria said she'd cover some afternoon visits. She was very attentive those last few days." I thanked Rose and hung up. Then I sat at my desk staring at that medication log, trying to remember the details of Mom's final week. But it was all a blur of exhaustion and grief and the surreal experience of watching someone fade away. What I did remember was being surprised by how fast she declined. The hospice doctor had said she probably had 2 to 3 weeks left, maybe a month. She died in 6 days. I pulled up Mom's death certificate on my computer. Cause of death listed as complications from vascular dementia and stroke, natural causes. No autopsy had been performed because there was no reason to suspect anything other than natural death under hospice care. I opened a new browser window and started researching morphine overdose in hospice patients. It's surprisingly common, but usually accidental. Usually due to dosing errors or patients taking extra medication because they forget they already took some. Respiratory depression, unconsciousness, death. Easily mistaken for natural disease progression in someone already dying. I felt sick. I called the hospice agency that had provided Mom's end of life care. After being transferred 3 times, I reached the nursing supervisor who'd overseen Mom's case. Her name was Janet Park and she remembered our family. "I'm calling about my mother Eleanor Chen's final week of care," I said. "I have some questions about her medication management." "Of course. What would you like to know?" "Her decline in the final days was very rapid. I'm wondering if there were any concerns about her morphine dosing. Any indication she might have received too much?" Janet was quiet for a moment. "Are you asking if we made a dosing error?" "I'm asking if there's any possibility she received more morphine than prescribed. Our nurses follow very strict protocols. Every dose is documented, every medication access is logged. If you're concerned about our care quality, I can request a review of the case file. I'd appreciate that. I'd also like copies of all medication logs from her final 2 weeks, including documentation of who accessed the medication lockbox and when." "May I ask what prompted these questions?" I chose my words carefully. I recently learned that there were visits and medication discussions I wasn't aware of during Mom's final week. I just want to make sure everything was handled appropriately. I'll have the case manager pull the file and contact you. This may take a few days. It took 4 days. When the case manager called back, her voice was different, more formal, like she was reading from a script. "Ms. Chen, I've reviewed your mother's file and consulted with our medical director. All medication administration was properly documented and within prescribed parameters. However, there is one notation that our director wanted to bring to your attention." "What notation?" 3 days before your mother passed, the overnight nurse documented finding an additional partial dose of morphine in the lockbox that wasn't accounted for in our logs. The nurse assumed it was left over from a previous prescription change and disposed of it per protocol. But our medical director says that doesn't align with the prescription history. There shouldn't have been extra medication in that lockbox." I closed my eyes. "What does that mean?" "It could mean nothing. Sometimes there are administrative errors in medication tracking. But our director wanted to make you aware in case you have concerns about medication access during that time period. The lockbox was kept in your mother's bedroom, and family members did have physical access to the room, though not the key to the lockbox itself. Could someone have added medication to the box? The box was locked and only the nurses had keys. But if someone had access to liquid morphine from another source, theoretically they could have added it to existing doses to increase the concentration. Our nurses wouldn't have noticed unless they specifically tested the concentration, which we don't do routinely. Why would someone do that? I can't speculate on motivation. I'm just explaining what would be theoretically possible. Ms. Chen, if you have concerns about foul play, you should contact the police, not us. We're required to report any suspicion of patient harm, and this conversation is going to be documented in your mother's file. I want to be very clear about that." "I understand. Thank you for the information." I hung up and sat very still. Extra morphine in the lockbox. Victoria asking detailed questions about medication schedules and access. Mom's unexpectedly rapid decline. Victoria spending time alone with Mom in those final days. It could all be coincidence. It could all be innocent. Or Victoria could have killed our mother. I spent the next week barely sleeping, going through everything I had from those final days. Looking for patterns. For something that would confirm or deny what I was starting to believe. I found Mom's prescription records showing she'd been prescribed liquid morphine for breakthrough pain 2 months before she died. A small bottle that should have lasted weeks. The bottle was never found after she died. I'd assumed hospice disposed of it, or it got lost in the chaos of clearing out her room. But what if Victoria took it? What if she took that prescription bottle and used it to increase the morphine concentration in Mom's hospice doses, accelerating her death by days or weeks so she could inherit faster? Before anyone could question the will. Before Mom potentially changed it back. I had no proof. Just circumstantial evidence and a horrible suspicion that was either paranoid grief or the truth. I thought about Victoria's public persona, her advocacy work, her position on the nonprofit board. She'd built an entire platform on the narrative of being a devoted caregiver who'd shepherded her mother through dementia with love and compassion. She gave interviews about the importance of proper pain management and end-of life care. She wrote blog posts about making difficult decisions about morphine dosing and comfort care. She'd positioned herself as an expert on exactly the kind of death she might have caused. And experts make themselves vulnerable when they speak publicly about things they're not supposed to know. I started going through every interview Victoria had given, every blog post she'd written, every public statement she'd made about Mom's death. I was looking for details, for medical specifics that a family member wouldn't normally know, for language that sounded rehearsed or defensive. I found it in a podcast interview she'd done 8 months ago for an Alzheimer's awareness campaign. The host asked her about the hardest part of her mother's final days, and Victoria said, "The most difficult thing was watching her pain levels and trying to balance comfort care with making sure we weren't over-sedating her. We had to be very careful with morphine dosing because too much can suppress respiratory function and actually hasten death, which is the last thing you want when you're trying to keep someone comfortable." I remember telling the hospice nurse we needed to check the concentration levels regularly to make sure the dosing was accurate. Check the concentration levels regularly. That's not something a family member says. That's something someone says who's thinking about concentration levels, who's worried about concentration being tested, who's trying to preemptively explain why they were asking about concentration. I made a note of the timestamp and kept searching. In a blog post from a year ago, Victoria wrote, "One of the things I learned during Mom's hospice care is how important it is to properly dispose of unused medication. We had a situation where there was confusion about leftover morphine, and it made me realize how easy it would be for medication to be misused or misplaced if families aren't vigilant." Confusion about leftover morphine. The extra dose the nurse found in the lockbox. Victoria was narrating her own crime, probably not even realizing she was doing it. Just processing her guilt or her fear through public writing that made her look knowledgeable and responsible. I downloaded every interview, every blog post, every public statement and started building a timeline. Victoria's public narrative versus the actual medical records versus Rose's notes versus the hospice documentation. The inconsistencies were small, but they were there. While I was doing this, the ethics investigation at the nonprofit was progressing. I got an email from the committee chair asking if I would be willing to participate in a formal interview about my complaint. I said yes, and we scheduled it for 2 weeks out. I was organizing my evidence for the interview when Victoria called. I almost didn't answer because I needed to stay focused. Stay in character, not let my suspicions show. But I picked up on the 4th ring. "Sarah, hi. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Her voice sounded strained. "No, it's fine. I wanted to give you a heads up about something." I've been contacted by some kind of ethics committee from the nonprofit I'm on the board for. They're asking questions about Mom's estate and my caregiving role. Do you know anything about this? My pulse spiked, but I kept my voice neutral. What kind of questions? About the will, about how much time I spent with Mom versus how much time you spent with her. Someone filed a complaint apparently. They wouldn't tell me who, but I can't imagine anyone else would know enough detail to make this kind of accusation, except someone in the family. Sarah, did you file a complaint against me? I let the silence stretch for 3 seconds, just long enough to create doubt. Then I said, Victoria, why would I do that? We've moved past all that. I forgave you years ago, but someone told them about the will change, about the $50,000, about all of it. If it wasn't you, then who would even know those details? Patricia knows. Rosa knows. Any of Mom's doctors or hospice workers who were around during that time. It could have been anyone who thought what happened was inappropriate. But you're the only one who would have motive to damage my reputation. I don't have motive, Victoria. I have no interest in damaging your reputation. I'm happy with my life. I've moved on from the inheritance issue. And honestly, I'm proud of the work you're doing with the nonprofit. If someone filed a complaint, it wasn't me. I was lying so smoothly I almost believed myself. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, would you be willing to speak to the ethics committee if they contact you? Tell them that we've resolved our differences, that there's no ongoing family conflict, that the complaint is probably from someone with outdated information. Of course, if they reach out, I'll be completely honest about our current relationship. Thank you, I really appreciate that. This whole thing has me stressed out. The board position is important to me, and I don't want some old family drama to ruin it. I understand. Don't worry, Victoria. Everything's going to work out exactly as it should. We hung up and I sat there feeling the weight of what I'd just done. I looked my sister in the eye metaphorically, and lied to her while knowing I was the one trying to destroy her. It should have felt wrong. It should have made me feel guilty. It didn't. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Sarah Chen? Yes. Who's calling? My name is Michael Torres. I'm a private investigator hired by the board of directors for the Alzheimer's Foundation. I understand you filed an ethics complaint regarding Victoria Chen. The nonprofit hired an investigator. This was bigger than I'd expected. I did file a complaint, yes. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the details. Would you be available this week? We met at a coffee shop on Thursday afternoon. Michael Torres was in his 50s, gray hair, tired eyes, the look of someone who'd spent decades digging through other people's secrets. He had a folder thick with documents and he ordered black coffee and got straight to business. Your complaint alleges that Ms. Victoria Chen committed financial elder abuse against your mother and misrepresented her caregiving role to gain board position. I need to verify the accuracy of these claims. I spent 90 minutes telling him everything. The will change. Patricia's statement. Rose's notes. The $50,000 payout. Victoria's public narrative versus reality. He took notes and asked clarifying questions and his expression never changed. But I could tell he was building a case in his head. When I finished, he said, "This is compelling evidence of estate manipulation. The Foundation takes ethics violations very seriously, especially when board members build public platforms on false narratives. However, I need to ask you something directly. What's your ultimate goal here? Are you trying to overturn the will? Sue for the inheritance? Or are you trying to destroy your sister's reputation?" I met his eyes. I want the truth to be known. I want Victoria to lose the platform she built on lies about our mother. I want her to experience consequences for what she did. That's fair. But I need you to understand that my investigation is limited to the ethics complaint. If there are criminal matters involved, that's outside my scope. I understand. Good. Because there's something in your complaint that concerns me from an investigative standpoint. You mentioned Victoria asking specific questions about medication management in your mother's final days. Combined with the hospice nurse's documentation of unexplained morphine in the lockbox, that raises questions beyond financial misconduct. I nodded slowly. I know. Have you considered that Victoria might have done more than manipulate a will? Yes. And I can't prove it. The body was buried without autopsy. Toxicology wasn't done. All I can do is expose what she did with the estate and hope that's enough. Michael was quiet for a moment. There might be another way. If Victoria believes she's about to be exposed for financial abuse, she might panic. Panicked people make mistakes. Panicked people sometimes confess to things they shouldn't, especially if they think a limited confession will prevent deeper investigation. If you're patient and strategic, you might get her to reveal more than she intends to. Are you suggesting I try to get her to confess? I'm suggesting that my investigation is going to create pressure on Victoria that might make her vulnerable to saying things she'll regret. He gave me his card and left. I sat in that coffee shop for another hour thinking about what he'd said. Victoria was about to face an ethics investigation that could destroy her nonprofit position. She was scared. She'd already called me once asking if I was involved. She was looking for allies, for support, for someone to help her manage this crisis. And I was the perfect person to offer that support while quietly maneuvering her towards self-destruction. I texted Victoria that evening. Hey, I've been thinking about what you said about the ethics investigation. Want to grab dinner this weekend? I might have some thoughts on how to handle it. She responded within minutes. That would be amazing. Thank you so much. We met for dinner on Saturday at a quiet restaurant where we could talk privately. Victoria looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, wearing expensive clothes that couldn't hide how stressed she was. She ordered wine and drank half the glass before the food came. This investigation is consuming my life, she said. They've requested documents going back 5 years. They want to interview everyone who knew Mom. They're treating this like I committed some kind of crime. What exactly are they asking about? Everything. How much time I spent with Mom, who made medical decisions, how the estate was distributed, whether I misrepresented my caregiving role. Someone gave them very specific information and I still don't know who. I reached across the table and touched her hand. Victoria, I want to help you through this. But I need to understand exactly what happened so I can figure out how to defend you. Can you walk me through the will change? The real version, the public story. I won't judge you, I just need to know the truth. She looked at me with such relief, like I'd just given her permission to confess. The truth is I was scared. Mom was declining and I knew you'd been handling everything for years and I was terrified you'd convince her to leave everything to you. You were there every day, you had all the influence, and I was the daughter who barely visited. I thought if I didn't do something I'd end up with nothing while you got everything. So you convinced her I was stealing from her. I planted doubt. That's all. I asked questions that made her think about whether she was paying attention to her finances. I suggested maybe she should verify that everything was being handled properly. I didn't directly accuse you of anything. I just created uncertainty. And the new will? Was her decision. I might have guided her toward it, but I didn't forge anything or trick her. She signed it while competent. Patricia confirmed that. What about the $50,000 you gave me after? Victoria looked down at her wine glass. That was guilt money. I knew I'd taken way more than I should have, but I convinced myself you didn't need it as much as I did. You don't have kids, you make good money. You have a smaller life that costs less to maintain. I have college tuition coming up. A big house with a big mortgage. Expenses you don't understand. I tried to justify it that way. She was giving me exactly what I needed. A detailed confession of manipulating a dementia patient for financial gain and She thought she was just venting to her supportive sister. I kept my face sympathetic and understanding. Victoria, I get it. I forgive you for all of that. But here's what I'm worried about. If the ethics committee finds out about this, and you don't have a good explanation, they're going to assume the worst. You need to get ahead of this. How? Write a statement admitting you could have handled things better but explaining your perspective. Frame it as family conflict that's been resolved rather than financial abuse. Emphasize that I've forgiven you and we've moved past it. If you own the narrative, they can't use it to destroy you. Victoria nodded eagerly. That's smart. That's really smart. Would you be willing to write a letter supporting me? Something I can give the committee that shows we're on good terms? Of course. I'll draft something this week. She hugged me when we left the restaurant. Thanked me for being such an amazing sister. For understanding. For supporting her through this. I hugged her back and told her everything was going to be fine. I was lying. Everything was not going to be fine for Victoria. I went home and started drafting 2 documents. The first was the supportive letter Victoria had asked for, carefully worded to seem helpful while actually providing zero defense for what she'd done. The second was a detailed memo to Michael Torres documenting Victoria's confession from dinner, dated and time-stamped, with specific quotes about manipulating Mom and justifying the inheritance theft. I sent both documents to Michael with a note. Victoria believes I'm helping her. I'm attaching her confession from tonight along with the letter she requested. Use whichever serves the investigation better. Michael called me the next morning. This confession is more detailed than I expected. She admitted to deliberately manipulating a dementia patient for financial gain. That's textbook elder abuse. I know. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you again. What's your ultimate goal? Because this evidence could be referred to Adult Protective Services or even law enforcement. This isn't just about the nonprofit anymore. My ultimate goal is for Victoria to face the full consequences of everything she did. If that means criminal referral, so be it. And the other matter we discussed? The medication concerns? I'm still working on that. But if Victoria's under enough pressure, if she thinks confessing to the will manipulation might protect her from deeper investigation, she might say more than she should about Mom's final days. That's a dangerous game. I know. But it's the only game I have. 2 weeks later, Michael completed his investigation and submitted his report to the nonprofit's board. I didn't know the details, but I knew it wasn't good for Victoria because she called me at 11 at night crying hysterically. They're removing me from the board. They're issuing a public statement about ethics violations. They're referring the matter to Adult Protective Services for potential criminal investigation. Sarah, my life is falling apart. I made my voice concerned and supportive. What can I do? How can I help? I don't know. They said someone provided evidence of elder abuse and financial manipulation. They said the evidence was credible and detailed and included witness statements. Sarah, could this become criminal? Could I actually be charged with something? I don't know. Victoria. And that's when she said the thing I'd been waiting for years to hear. I did what I had to do to make sure Mom died while the new will was still in effect. The line went silent. Then Victoria realized what she'd just said. I made sure the will was filed before she passed. Not that I didn't mean it like that. I just meant the timing worked out. But it was too late. She'd revealed the truth in a moment of panic and exhaustion, and we both knew it. Victoria, I said very carefully, what did you do to make sure the timing worked out? Nothing. I didn't do anything. I'm just stressed and I'm not explaining myself well. I need to go. I'll call you tomorrow. She hung up. I sat in the dark holding my phone and finally understanding the full scope of what my sister had done. She'd manipulated Mom into changing the will. She'd stolen $3.2 million. And she'd killed our mother to make sure she died before anyone could fix it. And I'd just gotten her to confess on a recorded phone line. Because 2 weeks ago, on Michael Torres's advice, I'd started recording all my calls with Victoria. Just in case. I listened to the recording 17 times that night. Victoria's voice saying I did what I had to do to make sure Mom died while the new will was still in effect, followed by her panicked backtracking. It wasn't a full confession. A good lawyer would argue she misspoke under stress. That she meant she ensured the paperwork was filed correctly. But combined with everything else, the medication questions, the hospice notes, the rapid decline, it was enough to establish probable cause. I called Michael Torres at 7 in the morning. I have something you need to hear. We met at his office and I played him the recording. He listened without interrupting, his expression darkening with each word. When it finished, he said, "This needs to go to law enforcement immediately. This isn't elder abuse anymore, this is potential homicide. Will they take it seriously? With everything else we have?" "Yes. But I need to be clear about what happens next. Once this goes to police, you lose control. They'll open a homicide investigation, they'll interview Victoria, she'll lawyer up. And there's no guarantee they'll get enough for charges. What's the alternative? You could confront her yourself. Just sister to sister. Tell her you know what she did. See if she'll give you a full confession before the police get involved. It's risky because she might destroy evidence or flee. But if you can get her to admit the whole thing on tape, you have something unchallengeable." I thought about Victoria crying on the phone, panicked and desperate. She was already fracturing under pressure. One more push might break her completely. I'll talk to her first. Give me 40-8 hours. Michael didn't look happy, but he nodded. 40-8 hours. Then I'm making the referral regardless. I texted Victoria that afternoon. Can you come over tonight? We need to talk about something important. She arrived at 7 looking worse than I'd ever seen her. Rumpled clothes, hands shaking when she accepted the tea I offered. We sat in my living room and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Finally Victoria said, don't you? Know what? Don't play games. Sarah, you recorded our call last night. You've been documenting everything. You're the one who filed the ethics complaint. This whole reconciliation for the past 3 years has been you gathering evidence. I was impressed despite myself. She'd figured it out. Yes, I know everything. How long have you known? About the will manipulation? Since the day Mom died. About the rest? Victoria closed her eyes. The rest? You killed her, Victoria. You took that prescription morphine and increased the concentration in her hospice doses, and you killed her before she could change the will back or before I could challenge it. You murdered our mother for money. I gave her peace. She was suffering. She had weeks left. Maybe a month. You didn't give her peace. You stole time she should have had because you were impatient and greedy. You don't understand the pressure I was under. David's business was failing. We were drowning in debt. The kids' tuition was coming due. I needed that inheritance. And Mom was going to die anyway. All I did was speed up something inevitable. All you did was commit murder. Victoria stood up fast, spilling tea on my carpet. Nothing. It's been for years. Even if you go to the police, they can't prove anything. I have statements from Rosa, from the hospice nurse, documentation of your medication questions, and now I have your confession on tape. I have enough for probable cause. All color drained from Victoria's face. What do you want? I want you to confess. The will manipulation, the elder abuse, the murder. I want you to go to police voluntarily and admit what you did before they arrest you and drag you out in handcuffs in front of your children. If I do that, I'll go to prison for the rest of my life. You'll go to prison either way. This way you have some control over the narrative. Victoria was crying now, silent tears running down her face. I never meant to hurt her. I just needed it to be over. I knew she'd change the will back if she lived long enough to realize what I'd convinced her to do. It was preventative. It was murder. I gave her extra morphine. Just enough to keep her sedated. To make the decline faster. She didn't suffer. The hospice nurse said she went peacefully. Because you overdosed her. Victoria nodded. Because I overdosed her. I had my phone recording in my pocket. This conversation was being documented. Victoria had just given me everything I needed for a homicide conviction. The next morning, Victoria and I drove to police headquarters together. I'd arranged for Michael Torres to meet us there along with a homicide detective named Rachel Martinez who specialized in suspicious death investigations. Victoria had called a criminal defense attorney who arrived looking expensive and exhausted. We sat in an interview room and Victoria gave her statement. Admitted to manipulating mom's medications. Admitted to deliberate overdose. Admitted to motive and premeditation. Her lawyer tried multiple times to stop her, but Victoria kept talking. Like she needed to get it all out. When she finished, Detective Martinez said, "Miss Chen, based on your statement, we're placing you under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Chen." I watched them handcuff my sister. Watched them lead her out of the interview room. Watched her look back at me one last time with this expression of betrayal, like I'd somehow done something wrong by exposing what she'd done. The arrest made news within hours. Nonprofit board member arrested for mother's murder was the headline in every local outlet. The Alzheimer's Foundation issued a statement about being horrified and deceived. Victoria's husband David released a statement about being shocked and immediately filing for divorce. Victoria's entire life collapsed in a single day. Everything she'd built, every relationship she valued, every aspect of her public persona gone. But I wasn't done. Victoria's arrest became a media sensation overnight. The headlines wrote themselves, "Caregiver activist arrested for murdering mother she claimed to save and Alzheimer's advocate built career on lie." Police say murder was for inheritance. Local news ran the story for 3 days straight. National outlets picked it up. A true crime podcast contacted me asking for an interview. I declined every media request. I wasn't doing this for attention. I was doing this for justice. But the attention found me anyway. Reporters camped outside my house. Colleagues at work approached me with careful questions. Strangers recognized me at grocery stores and either offered sympathy or accused me of destroying my own sister. The prosecutor assigned to Victoria's case was a woman named Jennifer Hartley who specialized in elder abuse and domestic homicide. She called me 2 days after the arrest to discuss the case. "Shin Chen, I want to be transparent with you about what we're facing. Your sister confessed to murder, which is extraordinary. Most defendants never admit guilt. But her defense attorney is already building a narrative that will make this complicated." "What narrative?" "Compassionate euthanasia. They're going to argue Victoria was acting out of mercy. That your mother was suffering. That she simply helped her pass peacefully during an inevitable decline. They'll paint you as the vindictive sister seeking revenge for being written out of the will. They'll make this about family conflict rather than premeditated murder. But she did it for money. She admitted that. She also said your mother was suffering and she wanted to give her peace. A skilled defense attorney will emphasize that part and minimize the financial motive. Juries are sympathetic to caregiver burden and end-minus life decisions. We need to prove this was murder for financial gain, not mercy. I have her confession on tape. Multiple confessions. Which will be challenged. Her attorney will argue you coerced those statements. That Victoria was under duress. That she was confused and grieving. We need more than confessions. We need a medical expert who can testify that the morphine levels were deliberately increased beyond therapeutic dosing. We need to establish premeditation and motive. This is going to be a difficult trial. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Are you saying she might not be convicted? I'm saying we need to prepare for a fight. Victoria has resources. She has public sympathy from her nonprofit work. And she has a defendant-friendly narrative. We'll need you to testify about the will manipulation, about your mother's competency, about Victoria's financial motive. Are you prepared to do that? Yes. Good. Because the defense is going to destroy you on the stand. They'll make you look obsessed, vindictive, motivated by money yourself. You need to be ready for that. I was ready. I'd been ready for years. Victoria made bail after 2 weeks in county jail. Her husband David posted the $500,000. Even though he was divorcing her, his lawyer probably advised him it would look better if he appeared supportive during trial. Victoria moved into a rental condo and started preparing her defense. 3 weeks after her arrest, I received a letter from her. Handwritten, 8 pages, mailed from her condo. I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity won. I know you'll never forgive me for what I did. And I'm not asking you to. I'm writing this because I need you to understand something that I don't think I explained properly during our conversations. When Mom was dying, I was drowning. David's business had failed and we'd lost everything. We were facing bankruptcy, foreclosure, the kids having to drop out of their schools. I was having panic attacks every night. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. And I watched you caring for Mom every single day with this saint-like patience while I could barely manage to visit once a week without falling apart. I resented you for being stronger than me. I resented Mom for choosing you as her primary caregiver because you were more capable. I resented my entire life for feeling like a failure compared to yours. And when I realized Mom was going to die with you getting everything because you earned it through sacrifice I couldn't bear, I snapped. The will change wasn't calculated. It was desperate. I convinced myself Mom would understand if she knew how badly I needed help. I told myself you didn't need the money as much as I did because you'd built a stable life without children or massive financial obligations. I justified it by saying I had more people depending on me. And then the morphine. Sarah, I didn't plan to kill her. I swear I didn't. I was managing her hospice medications and one night she was in so much pain, crying and confused and asking for you. And I gave her extra morphine just to help her sleep, just to give her relief. And she slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The next night I did it again, each time telling myself I was just helping her be comfortable. But somewhere in those days I realized what I was doing. I was speeding up her death. Not dramatically. Not with some massive overdose, just. I told myself it was mercy. She was dying anyway. She was suffering. All I was doing was shortening something inevitable while giving her peaceful, pain-free final days. I convinced myself I was being kind. But I knew the truth. I was committing murder for money. And I did it anyway because I was desperate and selfish and convinced I deserved that inheritance more than you did. I don't expect you to understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I loved Mom. I did love her, even though my actions suggest otherwise. I loved her and I killed her and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. If I go to prison, I probably deserve it. That I want you to know something else destroying me won't bring Mom back. It won't undo what I did. It won't heal whatever wound this opened in you. Revenge doesn't work the way you think it does. It won't make you feel better. It will just make both of us miserable in different ways. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to be the sister and daughter you both deserved. Victoria. I read that letter 5 times. Each time I felt my resolve waver slightly, which made me furious. This was exactly what Victoria did. She weaponized vulnerability and guilt to manipulate people into sympathy. She'd written this letter knowing I'd read it before trial. She was pre-sensitively trying to make me question whether testifying against her was the right choice. She was planting seeds of doubt about whether prison was truly justice or just revenge. I burned the letter in my kitchen sink and flushed the ashes down the drain. The trial began 6 months after Victoria's arrest. The prosecution had built a comprehensive case documenting the entire chain of events. The will manipulation, the financial motive, the suspicious medication management. the hospice nurse's concerns, and Victoria's multiple confessions. Opening statements laid out to completely different narratives. Jennifer Hartley, the prosecutor, presented Victoria as a calculating predator who manipulated a vulnerable dementia patient, stole millions of dollars, and committed murder to protect her fraud. Victoria's defense attorney, Marcus Webb Silver haired, expensive suit, theatrical presence, presented her as a devoted daughter overwhelmed by impossible circumstances who made tragic choices while trying to care for a suffering mother. Victoria Chen loved her mother, Webb told the jury. She didn't abandon Eleanor Chen during her decline. She visited regularly, she helped manage medications, she was there during the final days. Yes, she made mistakes. Yes, she accepted more of the inheritance than perhaps she should have. But those are civil matters, not criminal ones. The prosecution wants you to believe Victoria is a cold, blooded killer. The evidence will show she was a daughter in crisis who tried her best in an impossible situation. I sat in the courtroom gallery watching Webb perform and I understood why Victoria had hired him. He was transforming her from murderer to victim with nothing but tone and emphasis. The prosecution called witnesses methodically. Patricia, the estate attorney, testified about the suspicious will change in Victoria's manipulation tactics. Rosa, the daytime caregiver, testified about Victoria's sudden interest in medication management. The hospice nurse testified about the unexplained morphine and her concerns about Eleanor's rapid decline. Each witness built the case that Victoria had deliberately orchestrated her mother's death. Then they called me. I'd prepared for this testimony for months, reviewing my notes, practicing answers with Jennifer Hartley. But walking to that witness stand and seeing Victoria seated at the defense table thinner than I'd ever seen her, wearing a conservative navy suit, crying silently, I felt something unexpected. Not sympathy, not regret, emptiness. Jennifer took me through my testimony carefully. How I cared for Mom for 3 years. How Victoria rarely visited. How the will change happened so suddenly. How I discovered the morphine discrepancy. How Victoria had confessed to increasing doses to make sure Mom died while the new will was still in effect. I delivered each answer clearly and calmly. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. Then Marcus Webb stood up for cross-examination and I understood what Jennifer had warned me about. Miss Chen, you loved your mother very much. Didn't you? Yes. And you spent 3 years caring for her full time, while your sister lived several hours away with her own family responsibilities? Yes. That must have been frustrating. Doing all the work while Victoria got to maintain her normal life? It was challenging, but I did it because I loved my mother. Of course. But you expected to be compensated for that sacrifice, didn't you? You expected your mother to leave you the majority of her estate as thanks for your caregiving. I never discussed inheritance with my mother. But you assumed you'd inherit more than Victoria because you'd done more of the work. I didn't think about it that way. Really? Because when your mother changed her will to leave Victoria more money, you immediately began investigating whether the change was valid. Doesn't that suggest you felt entitled to a larger share? I investigated because Victoria manipulated a dementia patient into signing a will that didn't reflect Mom's true wishes. Or perhaps the new will did reflect your mother's wishes and you simply couldn't accept that she chose to help the daughter, who needed financial assistance more than the daughter who was already financially stable. Jennifer objected. Webb withdrew the question. But the seed was planted. He spent 40 minutes painting me as the bitter, jealous sister who couldn't accept being written out of the will and who'd spent for years building a case to destroy Victoria out of pure revenge. Ms. Chen, isn't it true that you recorded conversations with your sister without her knowledge? Yes, on advice of the investigator. You deliberately created situations designed to make Victoria confess to crimes. I created opportunities for Victoria to tell the truth about what she'd done. You manipulated your sister into incriminating herself? I gave her chances to be honest. She chose to confess. After you'd already filed ethics complaints that cost her her board position, destroyed her reputation, and put her under investigation. You created pressure designed to break her psychologically and then recorded the results. Isn't that exactly the kind of manipulation you accuse her of? I felt my composure crack slightly. I didn't kill anyone. No, but you systematically destroyed your sister's life to punish her for inheriting money you believed should have been yours. That sounds like revenge, Ms. Chen. Not justice. Jennifer objected again. The judge sustained it. But Webb had made his point to the jury. I stepped down from the witness stand feeling like I'd been beaten. Webb had twisted everything I'd done, the investigation, the recordings, the ethics complaint, into evidence of my own vindictiveness. He'd made me look as calculating as Victoria. The defense's strategy became clearer as the trial progressed. They weren't denying Victoria had increased morphine doses. They were reframing it as compassion attend of life care rather than murder. They called a palliative care expert who testified that increasing morphine dosing for hospice patients was standard practice for managing pain and distress. They called a medical ethicist who discussed the gray areas around terminal sedation. They called Victoria's friends and colleagues who testified about her devotion to Alzheimer's advocacy and her reputation as someone who genuinely cared about patient dignity. They built a narrative where Victoria was a flawed but loving daughter who'd made terrible choices under impossible pressure, but who'd never intended to harm her mother. She took the stand wearing minimal makeup, hair pulled back simply, looking exhausted and remorseful. Marcus Webb walked her through her testimony with practiced sympathy. Victoria, tell the jury about your relationship with your mother. I loved my mom deeply. She was my best friend for most of my life. When she got sick, I wanted to help. But I had 4 children at home and my husband's business was failing and I couldn't be there every day like Sarah could. I felt guilty about that constantly. What happened when you visited your mother in the months before she died? She was declining rapidly. Some days she didn't recognize me. She was confused, agitated, in pain. The hospice medications weren't managing her symptoms well. I watched her suffer and I felt helpless. Did you increase her morphine dosing? Yes. If she seemed distressed or in pain, I would give her extra morphine to help her rest comfortably. The hospice nurse had explained how to adjust dosing for symptom management and I was trying to follow those guidelines. Did you intend to kill your mother? Victoria's voice broke. Never. I loved my mom. I was trying to help her be comfortable during her final days. If I gave her too much medication, it was because I was desperate to ease her suffering, not because I wanted her to die. What about the will change? Did you manipulate your mother into changing her will? I had conversations with my mom about my financial situation because I was scared. We were facing bankruptcy, possibly losing our house. My children were going to have to leave their schools. I was having panic attacks every night. I talked to Mom about it because she was my mother and I needed her support. If she decided to change her will to help me, that was her choice as a competent adult. Did you know your sister Sarah was recording your conversations when you confessed to increasing morphine doses? No. I thought I was talking to my sister privately about the worst mistake of my life. I was devastated, confused, grieving the investigation and the ethics violations. Sarah asked me questions and I answered honestly because I trusted her. I didn't know she was documenting everything to use against me. Marcus Webb let that hang in the air, the image of Sarah secretly recording her desperate, grieving sister and then using those recordings to destroy her. Victoria, if you could go back and do things differently, what would you change? Everything. I would have been honest with Sarah from the beginning about my financial problems. I would have asked for help instead of manipulating the situation. I would have trusted the hospice team to manage Mom's medications instead of trying to do it myself. I would have faced bankruptcy and foreclosure rather than accepting money I didn't fully earn. I made terrible choices and I will regret them for the rest of my life. But I never intended to kill my mother. I loved her. I just wanted her suffering to end. She was crying by the end of her testimony. Real tears, genuine emotion. The jury watched her with sympathy. Jennifer Hartley tried to break her on cross-examination, but Victoria stuck to her narrative. She'd made mistakes but not with murderous intent. She'd accepted too much inheritance, but it was her mother's choice. She'd increased morphine dosing but only for comfort care. She'd confessed under duress to crimes she didn't fully commit. Closing arguments were brutal. Jennifer Hartley presented Victoria as a calculating killer who'd manipulated a dementia patient, stolen millions, and committed murder to protect her fraud. She didn't love her mother. She loved her mother's money. And when she realized that money was at risk, she killed to protect it. That's not mercy. Marcus Webb presented me as the vindictive sister who'd systematically destroyed Victoria's life out of jealousy and revenge. Sarah Chen spent for years building a case against her sister because she couldn't accept that their mother chose to help the daughter who needed it most. She recorded private conversations. She filed ethics complaints. She manipulated Victoria into confessions under duress. And now she wants you to send her sister to prison to satisfy her own need for revenge. That's not justice. The jury deliberated for 3 days. I spent those days in a state of suspended anxiety. I'd spent for years building this case, gathering evidence, maneuvering Victoria into confession. Everything had led to this moment. If she was acquitted, all of it would have been for nothing. On the 3rd day, the jury came back with a verdict. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. Manslaughter, which meant they believed Victoria had killed Mom but without premeditation, without malice aforethought. They bought the mercy-killing narrative at least partially. Victoria was sentenced to 6 years in prison with possibility of parole after 4. 6 years for killing our mother and stealing $3.2 million. I sat in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Not relief. I'd won. Victoria would go to prison. She'd lost her freedom, her reputation, her marriage, her relationship with her children. Everything I'd spent for years working toward had come to pass. But Victoria had been right in her letter. Destroying her didn't bring Mom back. It didn't undo what she'd done. It didn't heal anything. It just made both of us miserable in different ways. I walked out of the courthouse and reporters swarmed me asking for comment. I pushed through without saying anything and drove home alone. That night I sat in my apartment, the same apartment where I'd spent 3 years caring for Mom, where I'd discovered Patricia's statement, where I'd planned Victoria's downfall. And I cried for the first time since Mom's funeral. Not because I felt sorry for Victoria. She deserved prison. But because I'd spent for years consumed by revenge, and now that I had it, I felt nothing but empty. The pro-revenge part of me insisted this was justice. Victoria had committed terrible crimes and was being punished for them. I'd exposed the truth and ensured accountability. That was noble. That was right. That mattered. But the anti-revenge part of me whispered that I'd become exactly what Victoria's lawyer had accused me of being. I'd manipulated my sister. I'd recorded private conversations. I'd systematically destroyed her life. I'd been so focused on making Victoria pay that I'd turned into something cold and calculating myself. And the worst part, I'd do it all again. Because she'd killed our mother and stolen millions and built a public platform on lies. She deserved everything that happened to her. But that didn't mean I felt good about being the person who made it happen. Victoria began serving her sentence at a women's correctional facility 3 hours from the city. I never visited, never wrote, never maintained contact. She was alive, she was being punished. And that was enough. But 3 months after her sentencing, I received a call from Patricia Morrison, Sarah, I need to see you immediately. Something's come up with your mother's estate that changes everything. I went to Patricia's office confused. The estate had been settled years ago. Victoria had been convicted. What could possibly have changed? Patricia looked grim when I arrived. When the police investigation started, I was required to turn over all my files related to Eleanor's estate. During that review, I found something I'd missed before. A document your mother signed 3 days before she died. My heart stopped. What kind of document? A codicil to her will. An amendment. It was stuck in the back of a file folder. 3 days before she died, she came to my office and signed a codicil removing Victoria as beneficiary and reinstating you. The estate should have gone to you all along. The room tilted. What? Your mother must have realized what Victoria had done. Must have understood she'd been manipulated. The codicil is dated unwitnessed. It's legally binding. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Victoria stole from you and then murdered your mother to prevent a change that had already happened. I couldn't breathe. Mom had known. And she'd died thinking she'd failed, not knowing the codicil was legally binding. What does this mean? It means Victoria's inheritance was invalid. It means the estate belongs to you. Every penny she spent was your money. We can pursue restitution, sue her for the full amount plus interest. Potentially attach any remaining assets. $3.2 million plus for years of interest and damages. Everything Victoria had spent would have to be repaid. It was perfect. It was complete. It was total destruction. But there was something Patricia wasn't telling me. I could see it in her face. What else? Patricia hesitated. There's one more thing. The codicil includes a sealed envelope addressed to you. Your mother left instructions that it should only be opened by you and only after her death. She handed me an envelope. My mother's handwriting on the front. Shaky but clear for Sarah. To be read after I'm gone. I opened it with trembling hands. The letter was short. 2 paragraphs in Mom's distinctive handwriting, written in blue ink on lined paper. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Victoria has done something terrible. I realized what she was doing, how she manipulated me, how she turned me against you. I'm so sorry I believed her lies. I'm changing my will back because everything should go to you. You were the one who loved me. You were the one who stayed. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Something I discovered that Victoria doesn't know I found out. Check my safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box are the key. The key is in my jewelry box, inside the pearl earrings case. What's inside explains everything. And Sarah, whatever you choose to do with what you find, I trust you. I always trusted you, with all my love. The safety deposit box was small, unremarkable. Inside was a single folder. I opened it and found 3 documents, a DNA test result from 20-8 years ago, a private investigator's report from the same year, and a letter in hand I didn't recognize at first. The DNA test showed a paternity analysis for Victoria Chen, age 17. The alleged father was listed as Robert Chen, our dad. The result was negative. 0% probability of paternity. Victoria wasn't our father's daughter. The private investigator's report detailed an affair Eleanor had in the year before Victoria's birth. A man named Thomas Whitmore, a colleague from the hospital where Mom worked. The affair lasted 6 months. Eleanor got pregnant. She told Robert the baby was his. He believed her. But when Victoria was 17, something made Dad suspicious. He'd requested paternity testing. The test came back negative. He died 2 weeks later, heart attack at 40-8, sudden and unexpected. The 3rd document was a letter from my father to my mother, written shortly before he died. Eleanor, I know the truth about Victoria. The paternity test confirmed what I suspected. She isn't mine. I don't know if you had this affair because you were unhappy or lonely or if you loved him. I don't care anymore. What I care about is that you lied to me for 17 years. You let me raise another man's child as my own. You let me love her as my daughter. And the worst part is I still do love her. I can't stop. She's been my daughter for 17 years and I can't turn that off just because of biology. But I can't forgive you, Eleanor. I can't stay in this marriage knowing it was built on lies. I'm not telling Victoria she doesn't deserve to have her world destroyed because of choices you made. But I need you to know that I know. When I'm gone, do whatever you think is right with this information. I'm leaving it for you to decide. Robert, I sat in that private viewing room reading these documents over and over, trying to reconcile them with everything I thought I knew. Dad had discovered Victoria wasn't his biological daughter. He'd kept it secret. He died 2 weeks later. And Mom had kept these documents hidden for 20-5 years. But why? Why save them? Why put them in a safety deposit box with instructions for me to find them after her death? And then I understood. Mom had left me a weapon. The one piece of information that would completely destroy what was left of Victoria's identity. Because Victoria didn't know, had never known, still didn't know that the man she thought was her father wasn't related to her at all. Mom had left me the choice of whether to tell her. It explained so much. The way Mom had always been slightly different with Victoria, slightly more guilty, slightly more willing to excuse her behavior. The way Dad had sometimes looked at Victoria with that sad expression I'd never understood as a child. The family dynamics I thought were just normal sibling differences. And it raised a terrible question: had Mom changed her will to favor Victoria the first time because she felt guilty about the affair? Had she been trying to make up for a lifetime of secret knowledge by giving Victoria everything? I put everything back in the folder and left the bank. Victoria served 18 months of her sentence before I received another letter from her. This one was different, shorter, more desperate. Sarah, I know you probably won't read this, but I need to tell you something. The real reason I killed Mom wasn't just the money. 2 days before she died, she told me something about Dad. About why he always looked at me differently. She said Dad had doubts about whether I was really his daughter. That there'd been a paternity test when I was 17 and it came back in clear. I didn't believe her at first. But then I realized she was telling me the truth. I realized I might not be a Chen at all. That my whole life had been built on a lie. And I was so angry, so hurt, so completely undone by this information that when she declined as fast as she did, I almost felt relieved. Like the universe was solving a problem I didn't know how to face. I know now that she was giving me an opportunity to deal with it while she was still alive. A chance to ask questions and get answers. But I chose murder instead. I chose to silence her before she could tell me more. If you know more about this, if Mom left you information about my biological father, I need to know. Please. Not for forgiveness. Just for understanding. Victoria. I read that letter and felt something shift. Victoria had known about the paternity questions when she killed Mom. She'd murdered her partially to prevent the full truth from coming out. Which meant her testimony at trial had been incomplete. Which meant she'd lied to get a reduced sentence. I called Jennifer Hartley. Victoria just sent me a letter that constitutes new evidence about her motive. She knew about paternity doubts before Mom died. She killed Mom partially to prevent the truth from coming out. She never disclosed this motive at trial. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. If what you're saying is true. How much additional time? Depends on what we can prove. But potentially enough to keep her in prison well past her parole eligibility date. I thought about Mom's last wish. About the letter asking me to make the right choice. About mercy versus justice. Then I thought about Victoria's letter. About how even after conviction she was still manipulating the narrative, still trying to minimize her responsibility. Send me the paperwork, I said. I want to submit this as evidence. 6 months later, Victoria's conviction was modified. She was charged with perjury for concealing her full motive during trial. Her sentence was extended by 12 years. She would be 60-7 before she was eligible for parole. I sent her one letter after that. You will never know who your father was. You will never know where you came from. That's my mercy. Then I took the DNA folder from my safe and burned it in my fireplace. Watched the papers curl and blacken and turn to ash. The evidence was gone. The truth was gone. Victoria would spend the rest of her life knowing there was an answer but never being able to find it. That felt like enough. The years passed. I donated half of the recovered estate to the Alzheimer's Foundation that had removed Victoria from their board. Used the rest to establish a trust for elder abuse prevention and investigation. Mom's memory serving a purpose beyond the family drama that had destroyed us. I kept practicing law. Kept specializing in estate planning. Kept helping families navigate the complicated intersection of money and death and grief. I never told anyone the full story of what happened with Victoria. Just said we'd had a family tragedy and weren't in contact anymore. 10 years passed. I was 60-3 years old when I got the call that Victoria had died in prison. Medical complications. She'd served 20-2 years total and died 3 months before her parole hearing. I didn't go to her funeral. Didn't claim the body. Let the state handle her burial. But 2 weeks after her death, I received a package from the prison. Personal effects Victoria had left with instructions to send to me upon her death. Inside was a journal. 200 pages of handwriting documenting her years in prison, her thoughts about what she'd done, her attempt to understand how she'd become a murderer. I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity won. Remorse, self minus justification, processing of guilt. The handwriting deteriorated over the years as her health declined. The entries became shorter, more fragmented. But the final entry, dated 3 days before she died, stopped me cold. Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I spent 20-2 years trying to understand what I did and why I did it. And I still don't have answers. But there's something you need to know. Something I figured out about 5 years ago that I never told anyone because I knew it would destroy the last shred of peace you'd found. Mom didn't die from the morphine overdoses I gave her. At least not from the ones I administered. The medical examiner was wrong. I checked her medications twice. Both times I added enough to sedate her more deeply but not enough to kill her. I was going to do a 3rd dose the night she died. But when I came into her room, she was already gone. Someone else killed her that night. And I spent 20-2 years in prison for a murder I planned but didn't complete. I don't know who. I don't know why. But I thought you should know that Mom's real killer is still out there. And they let me take the fall. Good luck finding them. You're going to need it. Victoria. I read the final entry 6 times. Then I closed the journal and put it in my safe next to the empty space where the DNA evidence used to be, because I knew exactly what had happened. Victoria hadn't killed Mom. She'd planned to, she'd started to, but she hadn't delivered the fatal dose. The night Mom died, I'd been alone with her. She'd been in pain, confused, calling out for people who weren't there. The hospice nurse had left for the evening. Victoria wasn't due to visit until the next day. I'd sat by Mom's bed holding her hand, watching her suffer. And I'd made a choice. I'd given her the morphine that let her slip away peacefully. Not Victoria's stolen bottle. Not an overdose meant to speed an inheritance. Just the comfort care she deserved. Administered by the daughter who'd spent 15 years caring for her. Mom had died in her sleep with me beside her, peaceful. Pain-free, surrounded by love. I'd spent 7 years letting Victoria believe she was a murderer because she'd planned to be one. Because she'd manipulated Mom, stolen the inheritance, and deserved to be punished for everything she'd done. But the actual moment of death? That had been mercy. Real mercy, not the calculated killing Victoria had planned. I'd let my sister go to prison for a murder I'd committed, and I'd do it again. Because Victoria had destroyed Mom's final years with manipulation and lies. She'd stolen millions of dollars. She'd built a career on false narratives. She'd planned to murder our mother even if she hadn't technically succeeded. She'd deserved everything that happened to her. The fact that she'd spent 20-2 years tormented by guilt over a death she hadn't caused. That was justice too. A different kind, but justice nonetheless. I closed the journal and put it away. Victoria was gone. The truth was buried with them both. I was the only one left who knew what really happened that night. And I was never going to tell anyone. I'm standing in my office now, 40-2 years old, looking at the framed photo of Mom on my desk. It was taken before the dementia, before everything broke. She's smiling, healthy, whole. I kept that photo through everything, through the caregiving years and the betrayal and the trial and the aftermath. It reminds me of who she was before Victoria's choices destroyed her. People ask me sometimes if I have regrets, if I wish I'd handled things differently, if revenge was worth the cost. I tell them I don't believe in revenge. I believe in consequences. I believe in justice. I believe that people who commit terrible acts should face terrible outcomes. Victoria manipulated a dementia patient, committed elder abuse, stole millions, and planned a murder. She went to prison for those crimes and died there. That's not revenge. That's accountability. The fact that the specific crime she was convicted of wasn't the one she actually committed? That's just irony. And the fact that I was the one who administered Mom's final dose, who let her go peacefully instead of letting her suffer through whatever crude attempt Victoria would have made the next night? That's mercy. Real mercy. The kind that doesn't ask for recognition or reward. The kind that does what's necessary in lives with the consequences quietly. I gave Mom peace. I gave Victoria justice. And I gave myself the closure of knowing that both of them got exactly what they deserved. That's not revenge. That's just the truth. And I'm the only one who gets to know it.